just to set the stage, I want to reiterate few things which all of us know very well, that we are coming across environmental challenges globally because of two big reasons which we say. One being that the population is growing and it is going to be in the range of 9.5 billion by 2050. And the energy demand forecast is to increase by a third. So we need to reduce CO2 equivalent and by around half to meet the goals of Paris Agreement. Because if we talk about Paris Agreement, we want to control the temperature increase by 1.5 degrees. So there are significant parts of society who are um, working in full force to meet this high ambition. And there are multinational companies who are coming forward. There are countries who are working. There are people who are working within the sectors. For example, we hear steel industry or cement industry. They are really making good efforts to make decarbonization. And then there are individuals, probably some environmentalists as well as some people who are, very focused to improve the environment. But still, we feel that there are enough challenges which need to be taken up by industry, by people, by individuals, or by legislation to address these factors. So, and those are the questions which we are going to discuss in today's session. And I am very pleased to have very impressive panelists over here. So, but couple of things which maybe I would like to raise is that what are the factors which are deriving different organizations, different countries to move forward? So if we kind of try to bucket it into different components, there are components like social pressures. So there are few countries in Europe, particularly in Europe, where organizations, including organization like Shell, who is under huge social pressure to reduce the overall carbon footprint and not only reduce, but to give a full plan of what we are going to do until 2050. There is pressure from investors. So this is a pressure which is being felt by developing nations because there are few global investing organizations who invest in the projects globally, and they are now making it sure that they will invest only in the projects for the companies who have their decarbonization roadmap already ready. And even there are cases where they want to go away from, even if they have already invested, they want to, take back their investments. And the third part is legislation. Probably legislation plays one of very critical roles, and we would like to hear the views of our panelists in few minutes on that. So with that, maybe I'll quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have Mr. Ashish Mathur. He is GM Sustainable Development in IOCL with 27 years of experience in different functions within IOCL. He is currently he is in business development vertical. We have Mr. Tommy Kress. He is Senior Director, Solution Consulting for Aspen, and he is responsible for Asia Pacific and Japan. And with more than 2 decades of industry experience, he leads the Aspen Technology Solution Consulting business for this Asia Pacific and Japan region. We also have with us Mr. Samrendu Chatterjee. He is dynamic professional with over 34 years of extensive experience in instrumentation, fire safety, environment, process safety management, in fertilizer, gas distribution, and oil refining. So practically, I can say that he has covered most of the breadth of our chemical industry. And presently, he is looking after fire safety. He is looking after fire safety, PSM, and business excellence as senior VP in BORL. So welcome all panelists. Just to kickstart the debate, maybe I will raise my first question to Tommy.
Sure.
So how do you see a balance between policy enforcement and organizational willingness to focus on decarbonization solutions? You know, this is kind of a debate because decarbonization doesn't come cheap. It comes with a cost. But then who pays for it? Whether it is through our license to operate by policy making or through some kind of subsidies? Like, how do you see this thing being balanced?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And actually, when you look around the globe, it's quite different, the situation, right? In Europe, the legislation is there. That there's a proper carbon trading scheme in place. There's a carbon tax in place. So carbon has a value in terms of reduction. There's an incentive, and so that makes projects that focuses on decarbonization positive in ROI, and that drives people, irregardless of legislation, which is always difficult, because even Europe is still governed, although it's the European community, they're still independent countries. If you look at the rest of the world, I would say they're lagging a little bit behind Europe in terms of legislation, but also in terms of carbon tax. As you know, I work in APJ, and you see Australia versus Japan versus South Korea versus countries in Southeast Asia all have good intentions, but they have difficulties formalizing policies and getting them accepted in their countries in terms of policies that are endorsed by their respective parliaments or governments. Having said all that, I've also noticed a very interesting trend. So we within our company, we did back in, it must have been September 2020, we did a global survey. We have a huge customer base globally, and so we utilized that customer base to just do a survey around what would be your top 10 decarbonization initiatives. And obviously things like hydrogen pops up in the top, about 41% of the customers. Hydrogen, move towards hydrogen. How can we make hydrogen blue and eventually green? Around 40%. And then, interestingly, somewhere in the bottom, hovering around 20% of the customers were talking about efficiency. And there was a speaker earlier that says efficiency is king. He used different words, but with efficiency comes positive ROI, but also comes, if you make the same amount of products with less energy, you basically are saving carbon emissions, or you reduce your carbon footprint. We repeated the survey just in February. Energy efficiency shot up from 8 to number 3rd in initiatives. Hydrogen is still there. Number 2 is carbon separation and storage, CSS, or some people use CUSS. Anyway, carbon separation with amines, and then try and liquefy and then inject them in high pressure, maybe in sediments. And maybe in the future we use technology to convert CO2 into chemicals. That would be great. That's far away. But it was very striking that energy efficiency became a top priority. So 40% of all the companies we surveyed. And I see this, in all our client engagements, people are focusing on what can we do now. We are investing, but we have to be patient with legislation, right? To maybe invest in CSS, invest in more longer-term solutions to reduce the footprint. But a lot of companies realize that there is still this low-hanging fruit. 10 to 30% of your emissions can be reduced by simply running more efficient. And whether that's advanced process control on a large scale, whether that's digital twins that are looking at rigorous modeling of your plant. They're not linearized modeling, no. Rigorous modeling to make your planning models, to make your operation more accurate, so you can actually predict the carbon that flows through your plant. Now, whether that's selecting the right feedstocks, we heard it earlier, that could impact the carbon throughout your plant, or whether that's tracking of the carbon throughout the manufacturing process. And I think that's an interesting concept. It's also The only thing you can do right now at relatively low capex with a relatively quick return, and efficiency is everything in this world where society demands that we produce our energy sustainable. I mean, we owe it to ourselves to become efficient, right? And we see a lot of focus in terms of companies focusing now on digital transformation, trying to incorporate all these tools that are available, right? And deploying them end to end, connecting the planning and scheduling of plants to the actual operations with advanced process control, and having digital twins deployed in the cloud, monitoring the energy use of your processes with the objective to minimize the energy usage for your production. And I think this is I see this at almost at every client as one of the key priorities.
I really liked your answer, and as a matter of fact, when we talk about what we are trying to do in Shell, probably improving the efficiency of current operations or current processes, it is in terms of energy efficiency or in terms of process efficiency, but overall reduction of the energy footprint, which in terms is reduction of carbon footprint for a process, and it is actually rewarding.
Exactly. It has a good ROI actually.
Yes.
And it's also not something new. I mean, everyone in the audience, I'm sure, is very familiar with the importance of energy reduction. And we as an industry have been doing it for years. But now we have the modern digital tools that have matured, that are augmented with AI. And so, yeah, really, I think it's going to be a step change towards digital transformation and focusing on getting our plants really efficient and producing energy. And that also gives you the time to develop the more difficult transformation, which is CSS, and maybe in the future even innovative processes to turn that CO2, not put it back in the ground, but maybe turn it into useful chemicals. Yeah.
Great. I'm moving on with my next question, but I will encourage audience, if you have any question in mind, just be ready, and I'll come back to you in few minutes if you have any question to any of the panelists. So I'll move my question to Mr. Samrendu. My question to you is that what are scientific ways of achieving net zero? Like, of course, we are talking about few things, and we just talked about energy efficiency as one of them. What do you see as other things or the steps of achieving net zero?
During this 2 days conference, we discussed on decarbonization, green hydrogen, and some topics on net zero also. Net zero is the meaning of net zero is to achieve the amount of emission, balancing of amount of emissions produced and removed from the atmosphere in order to reduce the atmospheric warming. In the refineries, majority of emissions are because of fuel consumption of hydrogen, and also consumption of power. Near about 80% of the energy of the emissions is from the fuel consumption, burning of fuels, and near about 12% is from the emission because of production of hydrogens, and near about 5% is for power consumption, and others, rest of the other percentage. Then there is no one sort of solution for all the industries. As you know, the industries, depending on the locations, depending on the complexity depending on the scale, it may be taking some various path. But the common thing is to identify the channels of reducing the emissions. We need to increase the decarbonizing energy fuels like green energy consumption increasing. We need to improve our operational efficiency by improving EII, by improving the reliability. Again, we need to deploy the emergent technologies for green hydrogen, for carbon capturing, crude to chemicals. And also we have to see the how to manage the policy mandates time to time coming to us. Having said all this, the next step is to find out how to go ahead for the net zero. First of all, we have to find out a base year where we need to calculate the total GHG emissions. Then we have to find out the boundaries, how to act upon this, and next to decide and take a target when to meet the net zero, individual, company wise, and also systematically segregate the various emission sets. I believe these are the way we can take up to the net zero, and depending on the complexity, and also I have mentioned the locations and others, company are required to work upon this. Okay, with this, hand over to you.
So maybe a question to you, Mr. Mathur. Ashish, I would like to ask you a very simple question from the perspective we are seeing Indian Oil doing quite a bit of endeavors in biofuels side. How do you think like biofuels projects are progressing, and what can they contribute to in terms of CO2 reduction, like in terms of, is it quantifiable reduction in terms of every biofuel project which is set up?
Thank you, and a good afternoon to all of you. Well, as a company, if you see, the maximum emissions that we do is from the products that we sell in the market. These are commonly called the Scope 3 emissions. And if you see our industry, the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are only 1/10 of what we do as Scope 3 emissions. So until unless we change the product slate of our business, the Scope 3 emissions will never be mitigated. And here is where the biofuels will play a major role in mitigating your carbon emissions. So two of the current biofuels that we are selling in the market include CBG, which is compressed biogas, and the other is ethanol. And incidentally, both of them have been mandated by the government statute about 2 years back. Talking about CBG first, compressed biogas is a fuel which is almost similar to the CNG, which is being sold in the market, properties-wise. And 1 ton of carbon dioxide, 1 ton of CBG when burnt reduces the carbon emissions by almost 3 tons carbon dioxide reduction is there. This scheme, which was launched by the government 2 years back, mandated setting up of about 5,000 CBG plants across the country with a potential of almost 15 million metric tons per annum. And the CBG potential in our country presently stands at almost 60 million metric tons per annum. But unfortunately, despite having environmental, economic, and social advantages, this scheme has been a non-starter for various reasons. I'm not trying to put the government or the whole scheme in a wrong perspective, but I would like to share with the audience the challenges that our company is facing. Even after 2 years of its launching, hardly 18 to 20 plants have been launched with a capacity very, very minimal, which is even not worth talking about. But the challenges that we face have to be, shared with the public. The first and foremost thing that I would like to share here is that a 5 tons per day plant, CBG plant, requires an investment of almost 35 crores. Now, earlier, the government body of MNRE was giving us a subsidy of about 4 crores initially. But that has been, unilaterally been withdrawn for some reason. Secondly, the banks are not very forthcoming in, subsidizing and providing capital for setting up these plants. With great difficulty, the industry has been able to, persuade with the ministry's intervention that this has been brought under priority sector lending, but still finance is a difficult proposition for these projects. Some banks have been providing finance, but it has not really percolated down to the grassroots level. Third challenge that we are facing is in the byproduct that we are, producing as from CBG, which is called liquid fermented manure. This manure is, with great difficulty, we have been able to get it classified as a fertilizer. It was not recognized as a fertilizer earlier, but with recent order from the government, it is now recognized as a fertilizer. But to sell it and to get it, it is being competed by the chemical fertilizers, which are heavily subsidized by the government. In fact, on the fertilizers, government has imposed a tax, which is actually a negative signal, because once CBG is produced, the offtake of manure is a necessity, otherwise you can't run the plant. And similarly, there have been other issues like imposition of the GST. This fuel that we CBG is a GST product, whereas a CNG is an excise and a VAT product. So though they are similar products, because of different taxation structures, they cannot be blended, and you can't be used against one another. So these are the basic challenges, and the last challenge that we faced in this is the pricing. CNG today's price is almost 70, but the government's price is about 46. So the entrepreneurs are really not making money. So the investments are difficult to get. So this is as far as the CBG system goes. Regarding ethanol, this is again a government mandated scheme. And in this particular scheme, if you see, we are almost blending at the rate of 10%, which is mandated by the government in 2022. And this target has been enhanced to 20% by 2030, which was the initial target, which has been preponed to 2025. And the ethanol blending from 20% has to be enhanced from April 23 onwards. So on the infrastructure side, the oil companies have all geared up to set up the requisite structure. The tankages are in place, and gradually we'll be, ramping that up as per the requirement. The sourcing of ethanol from the distilleries, from food grains, have all been in place. But I think the biggest challenge that we will face in this ethanol blending system would be from the manufacturers, from the car manufacturers. Because as you all know, that ethanol is a corrosive fuel. When blended, it can corrode various parts, and until and unless we have a system where we can replace hoses, elastomers, gaskets in the cars, this fuel cannot work. The current population of the cars or vehicles that we have in road are all E10 compliant. That means 10% of blending is permissible, and these cars are good. to hold that. But when you are wanting to shift to E20, when you have a 20% blending, then it will be a difficult challenge. So what the government is trying to do is that it has mandated that from 23 onwards, as soon as E20 will be rolled out, cars will have to be necessarily material compliant. Material compliant means that it will be able to good to hold E20 fuel, but the efficiency would be less. So that is called engine tuned. The engine tuned cars will be rolled out only post 25, when the entire country will be on E20 fuel. Bigger than that, I think the other challenge that we'll face is what will be the fate of the current vehicles in the country which are not good for E20 compliant fuels. And we have a population of almost 33 crore vehicles on the road, out of which 26 to 27,000 are two-wheelers, and about 3 to 4 crore vehicles are four-wheelers. So how to get E20 workable for the current crop will be the biggest challenge, which only time will only be able to tell us how we will move on. I think that's all from me.
Very, very well said. I have few more questions in my list, but maybe I would like to give some time for the delegates to raise some questions.
My question is to Ashish Pathak. Do you see any logistic problems to produce CBG on feedstock side? Raw material is easily available, or some extra organizational efforts are required for that?
So that's a very valid question. This is a big challenge. Feedstock side is also a very big challenge. And the main reason for that is basically the economics. Till the time this economics is workable for us, this fuel price with the current economics is obviously, we are not able to price the fuels as close to what we would want. So, and secondly, we need to have infrastructures in place where we can, take all the farmers and the organizations who will be, supplying this to us, to reduce their price or some kind of government support. Till the time it is not there, it is not going to be viable.
And I would just like to add one point to it, that one is feedstock pricing, and the second thing is feedstock security, because that's the other thing which this industry is particularly struggling, because the moment one unit is set up and it is requiring huge quantities of feedstock, immediately, the neighboring industry starts mushrooming in a very different way.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Ashish. Forest fire is one of the biggest CO2 emitter, and somehow there are, I belong to a place called Uttarakhand, and there people have started making briquettes out of this dried leaf and dried this thing. And whether these type of project will qualify for, say, this as a CO2 say removal from the system? Because if you consider the overall, say, percentage of CO2 which are being emitted is huge in nature. And when you are controlling these fires, so I think these type of projects which these governments, these local people are, say, going ahead, so they should qualify for this. If suppose we ask them to help somehow.
So I'll not be able to answer this question because I'm not too conversant with this fact.
This is a very tricky situation which we thought we discussed with the people, like say some of the IIT Roorkee, say management fellow, they say this kind of project should qualify. So I thought, being, say, in the same business, you can.
Maybe I'll ask you to give, because you seem to be having more knowledge about this particular subject. So can you share what is your learning on this point? Like, how do you see this evolving?
What happens, when we talk of the forest fire, like forest fire means it starts from, say, small, say, dry leaves which are there, and then it's spread over, say, area of which are in kilometers, and then along with the, say, the dried leaf, you take along with the, say, the whole tree, which are, say, green in nature. So the amount of CO2 which are emitted in the atmosphere is tremendous. And when you are controlling this through removing this, say, dried leaf and say the dried sticks which are there, and turning into the briquettes, and then using as a fuel, alternate fuel, and you can use in a boiler or in some other say stuff. So those type of projects, like one thing is the sustainability of the say people who are basically collecting it and turning it into briquettes, and then overall considering the forest fire. I thought this was the right forum I should discuss this.
No, that's actually an excellent point. And, because I have heard and discussed about things where we are talking about pelletization of these biomasses. But the challenge of collecting that biomass and the impact of removing that biomass is something, but that's the part of growth, I would say, that we are going to look in future. But this is something very important point you have put forward. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions?
In fact, I don't have question. I want to just substantiate Mr. Mathur and Joshi ji. India is one country. India is one country where each and every village has got the potential to have the CBG. Why it is not happening? Government is trying, government has made the policy, but still it's not happening. Few of the example he has told what is the problem. There are many other problems. Main problem is that we have been told that 5,000 CBG plant will be coming. Indian Oil alone has issued more than 1,500 TOI. All along oil sector has issued about 2,500 TOI, LOI, letter of intent. Now issue is that what he was talking about, the person who will be making this plant, he need to spend some 30 or 35,000 crore rupees. The first question comes, logistics, getting the material is not at all an issue, because we are in Panipat refinery, we are setting up a plant based on the rice straw. That is a 2G plant we are setting up. So there all those logistics we have lined up. That is not a problem. Problem is that suppose he produce the CBG, who will take it? How do I transport? Because he has to procure a compressor, because CBG has to be delivered and 250 kg pressure. First he has to procure a compressor who can deliver the 250 kg pressure, number one. Number two, how do I transport these 250 kg pressure of CBG to the petrol pump or wherever it will be sold? That cascade, India, that many amount of cascades are not there. That means there is a problem of transportation. Second, who will be procuring this CBG? There is a problem, because I as an Indian Oil or whosoever is the oil sector, they are not having an agreement, you produce CBG, I will procure. Why it is not happening? There is also a reason, because even if I bring the CBG, who will procure the CBG? Do I have that much number of cars in the road? No. So these are the issues. One is that there is no agreement between the person or the villagers or whomsoever is the entrepreneur. That is one part. He is not getting the money, bank is not giving the money until and unless I have an agreement with the end user. That is one. Second, I don't have the adequate amount of cascades. Third is I don't have any facility to download that CBG in petrol pump or wherever it will be sold. And next is that I don't have that much amount of CBG or CNG driven car. Another 2-3 issues he has already been explained. So these are the whole global issues. That's why whole Indian issue, that's why it's not happening. Otherwise, India is a fit country where each and every village can have this CBG plant. And through this CBG plant, what he said that 15 million metric tons of CBG can be produced. There 1.575 lakh crores of rupees can be spent. 75,000 jobs can be generated. And many things can happen. And not only that, right now, if you go to the villages, whole villages will be neat and clean, if I want to have it. And one thing he has also shared that whatever the outlet is coming, that will be used as a fertilizer also. Okay, some of the issues, somewhere it will be taken with the government of India, and somehow these relations are to be built. But it is a profitable and viable proposition,
so far India is concerned. And it is a huge amount of import substitution. 15 million metric ton, probably it is as on that figure. Probably it can be produced much more, because we have to create the total infrastructure. Policy and then implementation, there is a huge gap. These gaps are to be filled up. That is how we have to make the policy point to point. And if it is made, it is possible. India is fit for this. Thank you.
Very, very well said, and maybe I'll expand your point a little bit, because it's we were talking about in terms of CBG, but this is in the end, if we talk about the whole decarbonization process, decarbonization comes with its own cost, and there needs to be some kind of support, either in terms of policy or in terms of subsidy or in terms of enforcement, to help these projects propagate.
One more thing which Mr. Joshi was asking, or probably you also asked, that whether the CBG can be mixed with the CNG or not. It has already been started. Government of India has given also permission. We are punching the CBG with the CNG. But again, depends on how much CBG is available. It depends on that. So that permission is already there.
So
we are punching.
the permission is there, but only thing is the pricing structures and the financials.
Yeah. All those things. I support whatever you said. I am not telling whatever you said is perfectly okay. But then we have to make this policy.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Maybe a couple of quick questions before we wrap up. So a question back to you, Tommy, that when we look at when we look at industry, we also see IT industry is one of the biggest emitters, though they seem to be sitting in nice green offices, but these data centers are huge emitters. So how do you see a kind of decarbonization roadmap for them?
Okay. Well, that's a very big question, right? Because I don't think, like, Aspen Tech is not a spokesman for the digital industry, and I've seen huge data centers in companies that are not really an IT company. But yes, I get your point. So I think we need to focus on the large IT companies. Google with data center. I saw a data center coming up in Singapore that almost looked like a refinery. These data centers are huge. So we are collaborating with those types of companies to promote our tools, to help them design CSS plants, because they do have a obligation to society to also become carbon neutral. And companies like Google or like Microsoft, who have these huge data farms that produce a tremendous amount of energy, right? Whilst providing us with all that digital services, should also take responsibility, and there are examples. I can't go into much detail. That are using Aspen Tech tools, right, to design, incorporate into their system really a carbon process, chemical facility to remove carbon. And I think that is something unique. That is something that in the past large IT companies would not look at. So that gives you a bit of a, and I think that's quite unique. To be honest, I haven't seen that. I'm seeing that now. Obviously, as a company, I'm happy that that's happening, but also I think it's good for society that those companies, take an environmental responsible position and deliver their digital services also in a green way. So hopefully that gives you a bit of of flavor how those companies now are also looking at that, and they can't be exempted from investing in carbon neutral ways of operating and managing their digital farms.
Thank you. I know I'm sitting between the tea and the people. Just very last question to Samrendu about, because this question is not particularly for Bharat Petroleum or BORL. It's a bit of question which we can expand to the refinery sector. What do you see as, the enablers and blockers of net zero for a refinery?
while we setting the targets and also taking a target of net zero, achieving the net zero, in between there will be some requirements. Uh, Suppose EV is coming, we have to go for expansion for petrochemicals and all those things. Those are not taken initially into account to reduce the net zero. So time to time, as per the requirement, while those things are coming, we need to take care, and that is a blocks in the total net zero planning. What I understand.
Thank you. Any last question from audience, or can we close the session? I think this was an excellent session with few points which came out very clearly and very strongly. Is that we have to look at not only scope 1 and scope 2, but also scope 3 emissions, and we have to focus very strongly on our own internal energy efficiency, for which we don't need any subsidies, which is actually rewarding, which in end we can make money from that. So these are the couple of points which come very importantly, and on the top of that, of course, we need support from government on policy framing to you know to perpetuate these projects very strongly. So thank you for being very patient to hear this whole discussion. Thanks a lot.